Hey guys, sorry I had a little glitch starting my recording there. So I was thinking about you all today. I was perusing Facebook, saw some ad. I'm always seeing the health ads, right? So I see some ad for a woman who says that her entire specialty is that she's a gut health restoration expert. And I always find those so interesting because I feel like, first of all, almost by default, it seems to say that your gut is separate from the rest of your body. So healing the gut is something that we do in exclusion of the totality of our health. And although I don't disagree with the premise that our gut is incredibly important in our total overall well-being and in our health restoration, I will say that the gut is not the only thing. And that I think too much of the health information out there is focused on saying, like, if you heal your gut, the rest of your body will be fine, which is a premise that I strongly disagree with, because the fact is that our body is one contiguous system. And if we push too hard on one system, meaning we put like a bunch of emphasis there and we do all these things to make it change right away, and we aren't in deference to the way that that system interacts with all the other systems, we can actually create imbalance in other places. And this is something that has some relationship to Chinese medicine because, you know, if we take the Chinese medicine model of the body, the large intestine is connected to the lungs, actually, and the small intestine connected to the heart. So right there you can see that there's this interconnected relationship, that we cannot think of one in exclusion of the other because there are deep interconnected dynamics that must be honored. Now, if we also take into consideration the massive amount of lymphatic tissue and nervous system tissue innervating our gut, right there we can see that, my gosh, the second I make an effect on the gut, I'm making an effect on the nervous system. And that, of course, is some of the reason why some people say, like, oh, if you heal your gut, you heal your brain. But if you have a brain energy issue, meaning your brain is not getting enough glucose, it's having trouble having enough T3, it doesn't have the nutrients to run its functionality at the best capacity, if you improve one side of the relationship and you haven't improved the other one, then you're back in that same situation where you still have low energy in the brain sense and your brain can't keep up, and then you don't get the change you're looking for. So a lot of times with regards to gut health, you know, again, I see the same sort of thing. Some of you may have seen the video I made last week talking about, you know, the eliminate everything diets. And with regards to the gut, a lot of times that is the solution. You know, it's like, let's just take out every irritating or potentially irritating food and go this route of doing what is very simple. Because the idea behind that is that the more inflamed our gut gets, the more the gap junctions between the cells enlarge. And when they enlarge, then if we're having irritating foods pass through, then they exit the gut lumen without having been adequately broken down. And then that creates immune reactions, which is, you know, ascribed to be the reason for food sensitivities. And then that creates localized gut inflammation. And then that creates dysbiosis because we're growing the wrong quote unquote bacteria. And then we can grow fungi, and then we can have this whole breakdown in the way the system works. Most of which I actually agree with. However, the cause isn't in the gut. The reason why that happens is because the stress response is a run from the bear experience. You know, it is a like, what's chasing me? I better get going experience. Even though for most of us, that's not where we're living. Like, we don't actually think we're running from a bear and we're not having like big traumatic events happen. The fact is, to our nervous system, our modern pace in most cases is actually equivalent to that. That we are left in a perpetual state of stress that is so exacerbated, our nervous system triggers old, like ancient human responses and thinks that we are in fact running from a bear. So what is a practice that our body thinks is rather inconsequential if we're running from a bear? Digestion. So in the influence of all that stress, the normal biological response is to tell the gut, you're not needed right now. We're not going to put a whole lot of energy into you because eating and digesting is not something we do well under stress. So imagine the consequence when we live in a perpetually stressed state, and yet we think it's normal. So unlike if you were actually like running from a bear, you're probably not going to stop and eat a meal. But in our everyday life, we of course stop and eat a meal because this is our normal operating procedure. This is where we function from every day. And so we eat in that stressed state. Now, this is compounded, you guys, if you're eating in front of the TV, you're watching the news, you're scrolling through your Facebook, you're looking at your phone, you're standing, you're walking, you're driving while you're eating, you're gonna make it all worse. But on top of that, just the normal stress state tells your gut. So your stomach doesn't produce as much stomach acid in that state. Your liver doesn't send out the bile. Your pancreas doesn't produce enzymes. And then the whole motility of the rest of the gut is compromised. When we eat in that state day after day after day after day, you are guaranteed to have fermentation, to have inadequate digestion, to then create inflammation, which creates dysbiosis and can be the cause of growth of candida, can also be a great cause for initiation of parasites. And you can have this whole problem originating in the gut that isn't the gut, because the origin is the stress response. And this is what's so imperative, because if you go about these programs to heal your gut, but they're not stopping the stress response, they're not healing the cellular broadcast of stress, turning down the amplitude of the nervous system, nourishing the thyroid system, changing the parameters of cell energy, then you aren't solving the problem, which means it may or may not come back at your gut, but it's going to come back someplace else. Now, on top of that, see, this perpetual avoidance of food only sets us up to where we then have a bad relationship with food because, there's only a few things we can eat or that we think we should eat. And then it all becomes this like, oh, I can't have that. Oh, I can't have that either. Oh, I can't have that either. And a lot of times, the foods get really boring really quickly. So that's another problem. So we're bound to like veer off the path. And then if all you've ever done is quiet the symptoms in the gut by avoiding foods, then you get this big negative response after it. So then you feel miserable and it all cycles back around. Now, on top of that, that may create series of pain, because if you don't have much stomach acid, my gosh, putting food in is like an arduous task, especially digestion of good proteins. Hi, Teresa. And having adequate digestion is essential. That stomach system is so key. So if then the stomach acid isn't produced, but then there's a bigger consequence, because your stomach acid is part of how we make B vitamins. Then we have to make other nutrients in our gut. Like vitamin A can be produced in our gut. Like, hello, massive, awesome nutrient needed for hormonal balance all throughout the body. But if the gut's in a stress state, it can't do that. Then we could talk about bile. Bile isn't just like this fantastically amazing digestive component. It's also a place where you eliminate your toxicity. So you pass heavy metals out through the bile. You pass spent minerals, you pass pesticides, you pass spent hormones like excess estrogen all out through the bile. The bile doesn't move if you're in a stressed state. So now not only can it not participate in digestion, but now you don't have a toxin elimination pathway. And again, just treating the gut, even if you're initiating some bile movement, the bile really won't move adequately until you turn off the stress response, because it's too intense. Every time we tell our body, hey, I need you to do something, we have to take into consideration, like, why hasn't it been doing it in the first place? So if it's like, I can tell you have low bile production, but I'm ignoring the fact that the stress response is the cause, and I give you bile salts, or I give you, other herbs to initiate bile movement, I've kind of done you a disservice, because I have told your liver that now above all else, I want it to do that. And your liver may be sitting there saying, I don't have the energy for that. Are you kidding me? Like, I'm trying to keep us alive. We got the stress response coming in. And so it's trying to keep up with the message that you've externally placed on it that circumvents the order that your biology is running things for a reason. And this is the key, right? It's a reasonable option that our biology goes into moderation based on stress response signals. It's not doing it to screw with your life. It does screw with your life, but it's not doing it for that reason. It's not nefarious. It's actually just the normal biological impulse as a result of the conditions of life. Now, here's the good news, because you might have just heard that and thought, well, shit, I can't change my life. Here's the reality. we can moderate things like our food and our mind and our activity and the messages we give to our body to turn off that stress response and build more resilience. Because the thing is that that system wears out over time. So if you've been at this for 20 years, as you can imagine, it's like a loop. I mean, this is just the circle you've been traveling in forever. So your body is like, we do this. This is what we do. And it's sort of forgotten how to exit it. Plus, it's worn through all your nutrient reserves. So it kind of, even if it wants to turn it off, it doesn't kind of have the reserves to do it. These are all really key facets. So it has to be dealt with at the source. The other things that make an impact, like the more your liver gets clogged, the less you have thyroid hormone. The less you have thyroid hormone, the slower your gut gets. And then you get more putrefaction, which means, here I've got more dysbiosis. You can see it just gets bigger. Now, some people also are going to say, go use probiotics. Okay, maybe. A lot of people also say use fermented foods. And again, I'll say, okay, maybe. And the reason why I say maybe is this. Fermented foods are awesome. They've been being used in human history, as long as we can find historical reference that goes back forever. The challenge is that in a stress state, the body produces an excess of lactic acid. And most fermentation processes make a product that has lactic acid. And this can be a challenge because sometimes in some people's bodies, depending on how their system has gone out in response to stress, the fermented foods can make the problem worse because they already have an excess of lactic acid. This isn't true for everyone, which is why you have to be able to navigate that and understand what's happening. But I will say it can be a risk. Now, with regards to probiotics, it's another big question mark. There's some emerging studies that show that there's a link, for example, in some people with taking lactobacillus strains and initiating lupus-like symptoms, which raises the question, how do we know what to supplement in each individual person if some people taking lactobacillus can be the initiator of lupus-like symptoms? And so it raises this big question mark, which brings us back to the idea that wouldn't it be better to turn off the stress response and encourage stomach acid production, gut motility, thyroid balance, liver detoxification, bile movement, enzyme production, and relaxation, and consuming of foods which are balancing to the mucosa and the cell energy? Wouldn't that be better at allowing the body then to reestablish balance on its own? See, there's theories, and I'm sorry if this sounds far-fetched, but there's a whole part of medicine called German biological medicine. And they have been able to show in study after study after study that if you change the environment, you actually can get almost instantaneous, out of nowhere generation of commensal good bacteria in the body. Same way as if you change it to the negative, you can actually get pathogenic bacteria appearing the same way. So their science has shown that it may not always be about replacement, that it's more about the terrain. And so from a terrain perspective, the ideal is to build a terrain that is supportive of life. And then we know by default, based on all their studies, that you're going to get the germination of great bacteria. And it's going to be body directed, which is a lot more powerful. Now, to the other extent of that, the reason for enhancing the bile so much is that bile will also act like a roto-rooter, and it will go along the intestinal tract and it will eat away anything that isn't designed to be there because it's extremely alkaline, and the contents of our normal gut is extremely alkaline. So we have all these other mechanisms where we don't have to be at the whim of, oh gosh, I hope we just gave you the right intestinal bacteria in that probiotic. And we can actually be in alignment with, I know the root cause. Like the root cause is this issue with chronic stress response and how that affects the body and shuts down all these normal systems and makes it hard for our body to recover. That's the cause. And if we treat the cause and we do it with respect for how the body heals, then you won't have to worry about these other things. So just if you've been thinking about gut health, I wanted you to have that big picture of the fact that, for none of us is our gut sitting across the room from us. Like, it's central to our function and it's related to other organ systems and it's incredibly responsive to all of our interactions with our body. And of course has this huge relationship, yes, with what we eat and what we swallow and what we take. But for most people, the origin reason for their dysfunction is the elevated stress response. And that if you start there, then the gut automatically heals versus starting at the gut And then what you end up doing is doing this weird, like, I got my gut, now I have to do the adrenals, now I have to do the thyroid, now I have to do the brain, now I have to do the skin. Oh gosh, I got to do the lungs. You know, it's like this jumping around ridiculous game that never ends because you never treated the root. So we all can have the root treated. That's not impossible. But I just don't want you to be wasting valuable time, sometimes even lots of money on, you know, fancy gut remedies or fancy gut detoxes. That's another one that just drives me bonkers because they don't work and they're not worth it. So, and in fact, they may leave you worse off than you were before. So I hope all of you have an absolutely stunningly beautiful day. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And if you have questions, you know, post them below. I'll see it. And if you want to set up time to talk with us. I mean, it's what we do. You know, this totality of going back to the root, healing from the root, and getting the body moving forward. That's what we do. So enjoy the rest of your day. Get some natural sunshine and be kind to yourself. Blessings, guys.